I remember when I was in my 20s, I had this sense of like somehow life was happening out there, and then there was somehow some kind of veil or some kind of barrier between me and actually fully experiencing life. It seems like life was elusive, that I couldn't quite get to the bottom of it. I couldn't, sort of feel the juice of it, and I was sort of confined behind something. I didn't even quite know what it was, but it felt constrictive. Anybody ever feel like that? When we were first born, all of us, there was a period of time, probably at least a year, maybe a year and a half or so, before we learned our first word. And that entire time, we were living in wordless consciousness, right? Just present for whatever's happening, without the mental freight train in our head talking to itself and telling us what's happening. So that was something that we learned to do. We weren't born with it. What we were actually born with is just awe, right? Just amazement, like, wow. And it took a newly born baby doesn't yet realize that its body, its feet are part of themselves. It's a surprise when they discover that. It's like, they're somehow, some months later, playing with their feet, and oh my gosh, I can feel that inside and see it outside. Amazing, right? They're just delighted with it, giggle, laugh and try it again, and sure enough, same sensation. So there this period of time when we're just experiencing everything. We could fully alive, right? Fully conscious, present to whatever's happening. Sometimes we felt good, sometimes we had a wet diaper, but we were present for all of it. Even when we had the wet diaper, we didn't say, "Where's mom? I've got a wet diaper, what's going on?" We didn't say that. It was just an experience, right? It's just a sensation. And then it was only after we started learning words as stand-ins almost for the experience. There was the experience, and then there was the word, wet diaper, right? Two different things. We could say the word out loud as a spoken word. We could think it in our head and hear ourselves saying it in a sense. But they were both abstractions to the actual sensation of it. Right? Same thing for a warm hug. Felt good. I could feel it. And then later we learned there was a word for that, right? The word itself is the abstraction. So for a while, even as not an infant anymore, but as a young child, we sort of went back and forth between these two spaces. We were beginning to learn language and how language could be used to manipulate people, especially our parents, and then there were other times when we just drop into, just playfulness, just a direct interaction with our environment without needing to think about it. There was a time when we were doing a sense of foot in both worlds, right? A foot in, just spacious awareness, and another foot beginning to learn the function of language. So we're not saying language is bad, very useful, right? But it's good to notice also its limitations. So as we grew, older child and then teenager into high school, and these the patterns and the complexity of our mind's ability to inform us what was happening got more solidified. Yes? So we spent some time, just desperately trying to find a suitable identity in high school, a niche that could be filled, that felt like I could fill it, going through those sort of growing pains to sort of find an identity, find something that would give me, I don't know, a sense of uniqueness maybe, a sense of okayness. Anybody want to do high school again? And so, as time goes on, those patterns, those things that we sort of learn along the way, those experiences that we had, sort of cause us to develop beliefs about how the world functions. What kind of person I am, what I'm good at, what I'm not good at, what I'm comfortable with, what I'm not. And as time goes on, that view of ourselves tends to influence the experiences that we have, and then the experiences that we have tend to influence the opinions that we have of ourselves, right? It's sort of a circular thing where our conclusions about ourselves are affected by circumstances, but then the circumstances are affected by how we view the world, how we view ourselves, what we're willing to do, what risks we're able to take, what we're good at, what we're not. And so over a period of time, it becomes it begins to feel more and more like, well, I guess that's just the way I am, right? It's solidified. We started out with just not even being aware that what I am is housed somehow in this body, just open to everything, just in awe of this amazing show. And then somehow, we've gotten more and more solidified to believe, well, gosh, I guess that's just how I am, right? So it's a little bit, not at the risk of introducing tech into the discussion, it's a little bit like computer hardware, our fundamental aliveness, let's say, and then there's the software that sort of modifies how that happens. Sometimes it works well, sometimes not so well. But we could call that how the computer was conditioned to behave in a certain way. And it's just essentially the same as our life experiences. We're born into pure consciousness. We lived that, all of us, for quite a few months. And I think that's in some way a basis for our, it's sort of almost a subconscious memory that there's something possible that is blissful and at peace. And I think that's, in some ways, a lot of the motivation for just the spiritual searches to, not that we consciously think, oh, I want to be an infant again. It's not that, but it's that capacity to remember, to recognize that innate capacity that hasn't actually been lost. It's just been covered up, right? Covered up by what? Everything we believe about ourselves, other people, all our ideas, all our opinions, all our judgments about ourselves and other people, all that. But we take that to be true, it's our experience, it seems justified, this person's wrong, I'm right. You ever notice how it seems improbable that, each of us individually would somehow be in possession of all the correct opinions, just seems unlikely, but hey, that's our experience, right? No, I know this is right. So is often presented as spirituality is like, okay, well, I know what to do. Yeah, I may have these sort of conditioned opinions and constraints and dysfunctional beliefs about myself, but what I need to do is just fix those, and then I'll feel good, and then I'll be happy. So we can spend a long time trying to fix what we think is wrong with us, or have that sense of limitation, like it's somehow in the way of how I'd really like to be in the world, and I would do that except, I am a shy person, or I am not good around people, or I am unworthy, or whatever the storyline is, doesn't matter. Right? So we can feel like our task is, somehow I've gotten myself in this state where it feels like there's some sort of barrier between me and fully engaging with life wholeheartedly, without fear, that sense. That'd be nice. But somehow I'm not able to do that, not fully. Not without fear and anxiety. And what most people do is think, well, I'll just work on it. I'll go to self-help retreats and see if I can fix some of those things, and then everything will be good, and I'll be happy. But perhaps we can see that what has been there all along is the same thing that was there at birth, at a very young age, just this capacity to be aware prior to really the thinking mind, right? It's really thoughts that happen in our head that cause most of the problems, right? I mean, we can physically hurt ourselves, we can break a leg, we can get sick, we can, the bodies are vulnerable that way. Okay, so we know that. But what causes us the most suffering is the stories that we tell ourselves. And even those don't have any power except to the degree that we believe they're true, right? If it's just the mind chattering away and, we're not giving it much attention and we just know it chatters sometimes, we're not bothered by it, any more than we're outraged when, we're in an elevator and they're playing some tune, it's just background noise. But if we believe, if we have a thought and we believe that it's true, some thought about ourselves, it can be painful, and then it's painful, and then we have that feeling of pain in the body, and then we think, oh my gosh, I actually do feel this way. And that reinforces the thought, oh, it's really true. I've really got a problem, right? You see, this self-reinforcing thing where we can go through a thought, generates a feeling confirms the thought. We up the ante on the thought, the feeling ups the ante, more proof that it's true. Our solution to that is to say, well, all I have to do is fix the things that I perceive are wrong, right? Anybody try to do that? How successful were you? Sometimes, with a certain amount of effort. I mean, I remember it took me 2 years to stop biting my nails in high school, Not a real significant habit to try to break, but, easier than, say, for example, being judgmental or being angry or feeling timid or feeling arrogant. Those are harder. So we can spend a lifetime trying to do this, and maybe we'll sort of get this one in more or less in order, but then, then there's the next one. There's no end to it. We can always find ways that, we can be self-critical. We can always find ways that it's maybe okay, but it could be better, right? So there's, I see that there's often a sense at play where even when things are going relatively well, there's still some anxiety at play. It's like, yeah, but it might not always be like that. Or it could be better, this concern about the future. So this whole way of sort of deferring to the mind to tell us how we're doing, right? It's almost like our awareness sort of steps out in front of ourselves and then looks back at ourselves and say, well, how's he doing today? Is he being spiritual today? What about that thought? This sort of way of assessing ourselves. But what is that? Is that like two different things? How we are and then how we think about how we are? I mean, it's just two thoughts. Two thoughts in opposition to each other. I mean, we can give it fancy names like higher self and, the inner child or whatever. And then the higher self can act all important and knowable and, scolding but again, just two thoughts. Without the thought, it's just the experience. So I'm not saying thinking is bad. Thinking is very useful. It's just not very useful in the terrain that we're talking about. It's just not very useful in discovering our deepest nature. But it thinks it is. It thinks it's our highest and best self, this capacity to think and self-reflect. The problem is that it's often judgmental when it does that, right? It's often self-critical. This tendency to characterize things in a conceptual kind of way, either about ourselves or the other person or the world in general, is actually the veil through which we try to experience life. There's life that's happening, and then there's this, we have this commentary going on about whether we like it or not, or whether we agree with it or not, how it feels, how the other person should be. And meanwhile, it is as it is, and we can allow that to be or not. By allowing it to be, I don't mean that we are incapacitated from doing anything. By allowing it to be, I just mean that we can accept that is what's happening, especially if that's actually what's happening. And then we can decide whether there's something that's being called on for us to do or say or not. But what we avoid doing is all the inner talk about what the other person should do or should have done or shouldn't have done, what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad. All of that characterization just consumes psychological energy, right? But if we're faced with, okay, this is the situation, this is what happened, what am I being called to do for the good of the whole situation, not just what's best for me, right? Do I have a role? Maybe my role is not to say anything. Maybe the role is to do something, but I'm not caught up into right, wrong, good, bad, what somebody should have done, blame, all of that. Then it's just a clear response to whatever the situation requires. So this is what I mean about getting out of our own way. If we're caught in our sort of psychological web, we're not really present for what's actually happening. And the only way out of that psychological web is to accept that it's as it is, however it is, and pay attention. It's really, if we're trying to fix it or deny it or justify it or whatever, we're not disengaged from it. We're a full participant in it. But if we see a certain conditioning come up, certain behavior, maybe that's not served us very well in the past, we see that behavior come up, just see it. It's literally all that's needed. Just see it without judgment. See it in its full technicolor, without running away from it, without trying to explain it or justify it or, which parent it came from or all of that. Just see it. Okay, there's that behavior coming again. How does it feel? Does it serve me? Is it true? Might be 10% true, might be 50% true, but it's never going to be 100% true. If we suffer as a result of it, it'll never be completely true. There'll be an element in there where we're mistakenly looking at how life works. So if we're suffering, to see what about that experience that's causing me to suffer. It's never the other person. It's never the other person, right? We can always say, no, he made me angry. No. He did whatever he did, and your response to that was anger. That it was a condition, maybe unconscious conditioned response, but it was coming entirely from you. Because that person could say exactly the same thing to somebody else, and they didn't get angry, right? It's not the other person's fault. No one ever has the capacity to make you angry. You do that to yourself, or sad, or depressed, or, disappointed, or whatever. The other person does what they do, always perfectly in character. Maybe surprising to you, but it's always perfectly in character for them. And whatever reaction arises because of one's own conditioning, one's own view of the world, one's own view of what should be and shouldn't be and what's right and wrong. So it's always oneself. So when we find ourselves triggered, it's a really good opportunity to just see what's happening. Right? Don't waste your time blaming and they said this, therefore I did this, or waste of time. Right? Just come back to, wow, that's surprising, but still be with that sense of just this, suddenly I was enraged, amazing. No judgment. It doesn't mean that we can blab out anything that comes into mind, but just be aware of it. Often that's better to do inside your own head than to do it out loud. But however it happens, always within the limits of our understanding, right? So it sounds like we're not really doing anything, we're not trying to fix anything, but just the simple willingness to be present for and remain present for whatever arises, and to do it without self-judgment has a transformative effect. Not overnight, but over time it does. There's just something wonderfully mysterious about the ability of just remaining present for something without judgment that has a transformative effect over time. I can't tell you how that happens. I can tell you it does happen. It feels like we're not doing anything, right? And the mind will say, well, if I'm not trying to fix anything, everything will always be as it always has been. But again, that's just the mind trying to protect its management position. Trust me, I've been in charge up to this point, so trust me, I can handle it. So this idea of just remaining present for, the mind doesn't, neither understands it or likes it, because it's not really within its control. It's just being present for whatever the mind may generate. So it's actually stepping outside of the thinking mind, not in a dissociative kind of way, because you're still present, but you're intimately present, but recognizing that you're present in an observing capacity. Does that make sense? Right? You're there. You haven't tried to remove yourself from any feelings that might come up or any, memories or anything. You're still present, but recognizing that you're watching it rather than fully engaged in the midst of it. It's like the differences, if you go to the movies and you watch a Western shoot 'em up, you can sit in the audience and you're not terrified, right? But if you were in the movie as a real character in the movie and people were shooting at you, it would be a whole different situation, right? But if you know, well, I'm in the audience, I'm in a comfortable chair and the movie's up there, it's not, it's a different feeling. You're still watching the movie, but it's not the same as being in the movie. So we're not denying that the movie's happening, but we're just allowing this capacity, again, that we all already have in full measure, to just be present for whatever's arising, whatever the next experience is. And the more we do that, you don't need to sort of devote half an hour of your time, try to find space in your day to do that. You could do that in 3 minutes at a traffic light, or waiting for the checkout counter, or waiting for the water to boil on the stove, walking from this room to that room. Many times during the day, you can just step back into that sense of being observing what's happening. Not trying to figure it out or judging it or anything, just being consciously present for that. That's, if there's a practice at all, that's the practice. Just coming back to that space often and often. And the more you come back to that space, the easier it is to do it. At first it might be like, where is it? What's he talking about? But after a while it's like, just every time you stop for a moment and check in, like, I wonder if that awareness is still there now. Well, there it is. It's not a high state, by the way. I know it's been advertised that way, but it's not. It's nice, but it's not a high state. So we may have high states, we may have low states, we may have mundane states. It's what is aware of all of those. Doesn't preclude any experience. It's just what's aware of all experiences. And what's freeing about it is when we are able to come back to that space often, where it becomes familiar, where we learn to trust it, where we recognize that it's never actually absent. Our attention may be somewhere else, but that, wherever our attention is, there's awareness of what we're being attentive to. Right? So it's never absent. And when we learn to really trust that, we can begin to wonder whether that is our most fundamental nature. Because in a sense, that is a constant. It's always present. We may or may not always recognize it. But it is a constant. Everything else changes. Right? These bodies change, cells change, beliefs change, circumstances, appearances, home addresses, everything over a lifetime. But the one thing that remains is this capacity to be aware of whatever is happening. So when we recognize that, we can perhaps also see that this awareness that we're talking about is not of the world of form, right? By form, I mean things we can touch, measure, have things that have a duration, have a feeling to it. So included in the world of form is everything that you can think of. Thoughts, feelings, memories, hopes, fears, relationships, careers, everything. World of form. All has a certain duration, certain characteristics. And then there's one thing that's not of that world, and that is what's aware of that. Because this awareness, there's not a whole lot you can say about it other than it has sort of a knowing presence. It's doesn't have a form, it doesn't have a duration, doesn't have a size. And so if it's not of the world of form, you could call it the formless, right? You call it, you can give it whatever name you like, but you could call it spirit, right? You could even call it Holy Spirit if you want. Not of the world of form. Right? It's not distant in any way, it's just our essential nature. And the more we learn to just operate from that rather than from our conditioned self, life gets simpler. Life gets much more enjoyable. Movement from believing that the entirety of what I am is this conditioned self to a recognition that the conditioned self may still be there, but what I truly am is not that. It includes that, but it's not limited by that. That's the freedom.